Hello, and welcome to the Classroom and the Capitol podcast, where we explore the connection between decisions made at the California State Capitol and classrooms in Kern County and beyond. We'll speak with educators, lawmakers, and stakeholders to learn more about the process and take a closer look at how the Kern County Superintendent of Schools Office collaborates with school district leaders and state representatives to ensure Kern County student voices are represented in Sacramento. And now, here is your host, Carlos Rojas.
Welcome, everyone, to the Classroom and the Capitol podcast, where we try our best to dive into different decisions that are made up in Sacramento at the Capitol, and we look at them from a county-specific perspective. How do they impact our students here in Kern County and our schools and our classrooms? And today we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by two very special guests who I have a ton of respect and admiration for. And I promise I'm not just saying that because you're on my podcast today. Jessica Holmes and Amber Alexander have always been incredibly gracious with their time and very, very professional and just courteous. And I really appreciate their partnership. And so Amber, Jessica, thank you so much. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you for having us. I know, at least for myself, it's my podcast debut, so excited to be here.
Glad we can celebrate that with you. This is only podcast number 2 for me, so I'm a newbie as well. But we got this. So today we're going to talk about the budget that was just introduced in January by the governor, and I can't think of two better people to have that conversation with. And Amber and Jessica, however you guys want to divvy this up, but I'll throw the questions at you guys, and you guys can determine who wants to answer, or both of you can if that's appropriate as well. But why don't we start by you guys kind of giving us a little bit about your career path to where you are now as it relates to education and state budget in general.
So thank you again for having us. My name is Amber Alexander. I'm one of the assistant program budget managers at Department of Finance, covering the K-12 side of the budget. And my path to finance, I had a little bit of an untraditional path. We have a lot of folks that start their careers at finance. I actually came to finance after doing about 10 years in the state legislature. Working in the Capitol on business and professions issues, as well as education, and a little bit of environmental quality issues at the end. I had been told throughout my career in the legislature that if I ever had the opportunity to work on budgets, I should take that chance. So when the opportunity to come to finance presented itself, I jumped over and I applied, and I started as an analyst in 2014. And have just worked my way up through finance. I had a brief stint over at the State Board of Education where I worked on the California School Dashboard. But for the past 10, 11 years, have been in the education unit, learning various issues here at finance and working on the budget.
Excellent. Thanks, Amber. Jessica?
It's funny, my path was also nonlinear, and I also have some of similar experiences to Amber. So I started my career at the the California Health and Human Services Agency in the office of the secretary back in the early aughts, and worked on budget and legislative issues related to health and human services. Decided while I was there that I wanted to become a teacher. And so I taught high school. I got my credential, taught high school math and engineering for 6 years in North Highlands, which is north of Sacramento. It was an incredible experience. I felt like I got a lot out of it and learned a lot. But it was also incredibly difficult. And I have huge respect for educators. It's one of the most difficult jobs I've ever had. Decided that I wanted to come back into state service and applied for the Department of Finance, started as an analyst in 2013 and worked my way up as well on the K-12 side and the early ed childcare side of the budget. And then after about 8.5 years, I got an opportunity to be the Chief Deputy Executive Director at the State Board of Education. So like Amber, I went over to the State Board of Ed and was there for 3 years up until very recently when I returned to the Department of Finance to serve as the program budget manager here, and feel very lucky to be back and get to work with great people like Amber, and of course our wonderful interest holders, including you, Carlos.
Oh, I appreciate that. So talk about nonlinear paths to where we are today. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you guys before, but when I was 18, 19 years old, I had no plans to go to college. I graduated high school. I told my mom and dad I'm not going to go to college. I was living in South Florida at the time, and me and two friends packed up a U-Haul truck and moved to New York City to play music. I was going to be a rock star, and here I am 30 whatever years later and nowhere near a rock star, but I love what I'm doing today.
This is entertainment, I'm sure. So, you're living part of that dream.
It
Absolutely.
is definitely entertainment.
I was going to say, we were just talking about childhood careers where we thought we would be. So there's still time, Carlos.
The clock is ticking on me though, Amber. It's ticking. All right, so why don't we're talking about the budget development process today. Can you guys share some insight as to what that process looks like? When does it start? Who are the entities involved? What data points do you guys reference? What does the Department of Finance reference? How does this all come about? Because it's obviously a really important document that gets released one time in January, then of course again in May, and then enacted in June. But I know that as soon as that document is released in early January, it's kind of like kicking the hornet's nest. Everyone starts scrambling to talk about what was great in the budget, what's not so great in the budget, who do I need to talk to get this changed. So if you could kind of give us some background insight into the development of that document.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and then Jessica, feel free to chime in if there's anything that I miss. But you mentioned the January 10th release of the budget, and I feel like that's the most kind of public statement that's put out, about the budget. But there's a lot that goes into the development of the budget leading up to that point. And actually, starting in the summer, the Department of Finance will put out a letter that goes out to all of the departments and agencies that kind of just sets the stage for what's to come in the budget in terms of their budget change proposals, and provides some parameters and expectations in terms of what we would expect departments to be looking at when they're submitting those proposals. And for those that maybe aren't as familiar, the budget change proposals are just requests that the departments submit for augmentations to their budget. So we do, in most cases, incremental budgeting. So we're looking at what they're funded at already, and then any changes beyond that they request through that process. And those requests really help us formulate the budget that comes out in January. A lot of what's contained in there in terms of new policy proposals or supports for the department are coming from those requests. Additionally, we do talk with folks out in the field, our State Board of Education partners and the governor's office and others, to identify other areas of emphasis that we may want to lift up through the budget process and include in our policy proposals. And, again, that comes out January 10th. You do see shortly after that, by February 1st, we have to release we call them trailer bills, but policies that are necessary to implement the proposals that put forth in the budget. And those just came out last week. So I'm sure you guys are going through and checking out all the good stuff that's in our trailer bills this year.
We are.
So most of the education stuff, in this world is carried through an omnibus bill. So it's just one larger package of trailer bills that we go through. And right now, what we're actually getting ready for is the kickoff to the hearing process. So once the budget comes out, each proposal goes before individual subcommittees that are focused on particular areas of the budget. So our proposals go before the education subcommittees, and they really do deeper dives into each of the proposals and issues that are put forward, taking actions in May on anything that we've put forward. It is a very collaborative process in terms of who's involved. Finance is obviously at the tables testifying in these hearings. The legislative analyst's office has staff as well that are there providing input and nonpartisan advice to members as they're working through the package. And then obviously Department of Education or other departmental representatives are part of that process as well. And then there's a role too for members of the public to come to those hearings and provide comment and provide input. We rely really heavily on the input that's received on the proposals that come out in January to help us inform what's called our May revision. So by May 14th, we do another release of the budget that modifies what came out in January, just based on feedback that's received, or any new issues that have come up since that January release. And once that comes out by the May 14th deadline, it really is kind of a mad dash to wrap up the budget. So there's a constitutional deadline for each house to pass the budget by June 15th. And there's a lot of conversations and negotiations that happen between the Senate and the Assembly and the governor's office leading up to that point to get us to kind of that final enacted budget. I feel like that was a lot, but it's a lengthy process. And actually in recent years, it feels kind of never ending because there's, once it comes out, there's oftentimes cleanup or, processes that take place later in the summer, but that's kind of the high level.
Thank you,
I would
Amber.
add to that. Oh yeah, I was gonna say I would add to that as Amber mentioned, the major components and milestones for the budget process are all statutorily and constitutionally defined, but they're largely defined based on when we receive key information, both around state revenues, tax receipts, that type of information, because revenues are critical for us understanding what resources we have to spend in the budget, but also around federal indicators. So we do look at many economic indicators when we're projecting our revenues. But we also, for Prop 98, and this is very specific to K-14, but we also use other indicators like per capita person income. We look at COLA, and these are all built upon statutorily specified federal indicators. So our process is defined really by information and when we get that information. So it's a complex process, but I swear there is a rationality to it.
Yeah, I told you these are the right people to talk to about what goes into the budget development process. What I really wish on my end, just from what I've learned over the past 4 years, I wish our public was more aware and more involved in the process, because like Amber pointed out, it is a public has opportunity to speak into this, and I would just love to see more public participation in that process. But you guys are just fantastic at the work that you do, and I know that I've always felt like I've had every opportunity to speak into the budget development process on behalf of Kern County. So thank you for that. So Jessica, you also mentioned Proposition 98, and that's often termed the budget within the budget. I've heard it called that before. And there's definitely some constitutional protections that Proposition 98 has. I'm wondering if you can speak to a little bit about the overall health of Proposition 98 in light of the recent suspension, I think it was in 23-24, and then in the current governor's budget proposal, the proposal to allocate it a little bit less than the projected calculation for 24-25. Can you speak just to those two pieces and then kind of the overall health of Proposition 98?
So I think the good news for TK-14 schools, I should say, is that the health of Prop 98 is good, especially when you compare it to other comparable areas of the budget that are within the general fund. Prop 98 continues to grow, and we are able to provide things in the governor's budget like fully funding COLAs, as well as funding some additional priorities around IT for and master plan for career education for community colleges, some enrollment growth, and then on the TK through 12 side, able to fund things like fully implementing transitional kindergarten and the expanded learning opportunities program. So the overall health of Prop 98 is good. You're correct, Carlos. You referenced the 23-24 suspension, and that remains in place. But what happens within a suspension of Prop 98 is constitutionally there is a thing called maintenance factor that is created. So essentially, whenever the state does not fund Prop 98 to the minimum level, and that's either through a suspension or through a test 3 being a little complicated, but test 3 which is one part of the formula for Prop 98 being in place and having it be lower than test 2, we create maintenance factor, which is basically money that the state has to pay back to schools that collects basically what we consider like interest, right? It grows by COLA and growth. So we created, it's about $8 billion in maintenance factor with the suspension in 23-24. Our current governor's budget proposal is projecting that we will have a significant payment of about $5.6 billion of maintenance factor payment back to schools in 24-25. We're not currently projecting a maintenance factor payment being required in 25-26, but we are projecting that we will be paying back the majority of the balance of that maintenance factor account in 24-25. So that gives you kind of a sense of where the health of the guarantee is, and how it's growing and how the state is meeting its obligations to schools. In regards to the treatment of the current year, I think it's important to note that, because we are building Prop 98, we're always building Prop 98 on projections, and not actuals until the current year becomes the prior year. So until the actual year is over, we never do this thing called certification until we have better actual numbers. Certification happens, and the finalization of the Prop 98 level happens generally in the spring after the fiscal year ends. So currently we're going through the certification process for 2023-24. And that's when the final guarantee amount is locked into place, and the state can kind of see whether it's funded the guarantee high enough in that year in order to meet the minimum guarantee. So what we're proposing, generally speaking, in the past, we have funded current year and budget year at the amount that has been projected or calculated for Prop 98. But what we're proposing this year, given the amount of uncertainty that we're seeing, both on the federal policy side and federal funding side, but also in our own economy, and with things like the wildfires, pushing out a large chunk of our tax receipts, tax filing deadlines getting pushed out. We are proposing to fund the guarantee at an amount that is other than what is currently calculated or projected, because we have concerns about that amount going down. And just to note, statute does keep us from reducing the guarantee. So if the amount that we're projecting is going to be the guarantee amount, goes down in the prior year, it keeps the state from pulling down expenditures to meet that new level. So the state has a real risk if it appropriates to the calculated Prop 98 level in the current year, and then that amount goes down. And if the guarantee amount goes down, then we've over appropriated, and those funds have to come from the other side of the budget. So what we're doing is we're funding the guarantee. We're still funding growth in 24-25. We're funding about $2.3 billion of growth in 24-25. But we're not funding beyond that until we have a better sense next year of where the final amount of the guarantee is going to land. And so that's what we're creating this thing called Settle Up, which is statutorily allowable. And that's what folks I think are having lots of questions about. And that's I should say that is specific to the current year. Does not impact the maintenance factor payment, and does not impact budget year funding items.
Great insight. Thank you. I knew I should have taken, I'm going to introduce a bill, I think, next year that requires those of us in education administration to take a class on Proposition 98. It's going to be part of our graduation requirements. So once again, we're being joined by Amber Alexander and Jessica Holmes from the Department of Finance. So if it's okay with you guys now, I'm going to kind of hop around a little bit from a couple different topics that are included in the governor's budget proposal and get your thoughts on them. I'll start off with transitional kindergarten. First of all, we almost does need to be stated how important this is, that the youngest learners in our state get the education that they need to be successful later on. So we are 100% supportive, and I think you're going to get very little pushback on TK expansion across our state. We're very thankful for that. Along with that requirement, from a practical perspective, what I'm hearing from superintendents in our district is we're seeing additional kids in our campuses. That increases the need for school facilities, that increases the need for staff, for certificated and classified staff. What conversations, if any, have been held, or what initiatives are included in the governor's budget to help districts not only expand TK, which we're all in support of, and I can give you one quick example. We have a district here in Kern County that started offering TK a couple of years ago, and they were doing a full day TK program, But based when their enrollment got as higher than they anticipated, they had to cut that back to a half-day TK program so they can accommodate all the kids. So those are one of the challenges when it comes to facilities, specifically in that example, but staffing as well. What can we look for from the state in terms of addressing those needs with TK expansion?
In terms of the budget and what you see in the 25, 26 budget year, it's all blending together all these years. But in 25, 26, you do see the $2.4 billion in ongoing Proposition 98 funding to support that TK expansion, Carlos, that you mentioned. And that's intended to provide access to roughly about 60,000 additional children, which, as you mentioned, critical investment, and we're really excited to see that fully implemented in this 25-26 year. But additionally, on the staffing side, you do see an additional $1.5 billion in ongoing to support the further lowering of that adult to student ratio in TK classrooms. Of that amount, of that $1.5 billion, $745 million is specifically to lower from 12 to 1 down to 10 to 1 in terms of students to adults in those classrooms. And we tried to implement that in a way that promoted maximum flexibility to local educational agencies for many of the reasons, Carlos, that you mentioned. We do recognize that folks are kind of going about implementing TK in various ways. So we funded assuming that every LEA will add a third adult to their classroom. So functionally funding at that 8 to 1 level, even though the requirement is going to be 10 to 1. But we also recognize there will be kind of a mix of responses. Some folks, to the extent that their facilities allow, may go about lowering class sizes to 20 to have 20 students in the class with the 2 adults. Some may opt to stay at that 24, the 24 class size ratio and have 3 adults in the classroom. So we were trying to provide flexibility for LEAs to implement in a way that they saw fit and that they had the staffing and the facilities to accommodate. But more broadly, even beyond just the dedicated TK funding, you've seen an emphasis over the last several years in teacher recruitment, teacher retention, professional development investments. And all of those investments are also aimed at teachers broadly, but also TK teachers, as well as classified staff and administrators that are supporting those teachers in their school sites and at LEAs. So in the 25-26 budget, in terms of new investments, you do see there's a $150 million Proposition 98 proposal for loan repayment for teachers that agree to teach in priority schools. I'm really trying to eliminate some of the barriers that teachers or others may experience entering the educator profession. And that's been a common trend throughout the last several budget cycles in terms of investment that have been made. You've seen things like credential fee waivers and exam fee waivers over the years, and several multi-year investments in things like grow your own programs for teacher residency and school counselor residency programs, really aimed at trying to assist folks in getting into the educator profession so that we do have that qualified staff and workforce to support not only TK, but all of our K-12 students and schools.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Amber said. I think she answered beautifully. I would also just add, we do have Prop 2, which was recently passed by the voters. This is an $8 billion facilities bond, and understand that the Office of Public School Construction, through the State Allocation Board, will begin processing applications for that here pretty shortly, and anticipate that they'll be processing about $1.5 billion in applications approximately each year. So those funds should start flowing as well.
I'm going to jump over to the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, another program that's a great initiative, meeting the before and after school needs of our families and the intersessional needs of our families, especially the most vulnerable. So again, another great initiative. If my information is correct, I think there were several $100 million sent back to the state of unspent ELOP dollars from the 22-23 allocations, I believe. Any conversations or any thought rethinking about the funding mechanisms for ELOP or what efforts can be made at the local level to make sure that not only are the programs being offered, but being taken advantage of by the families as well.
Just to clarify, we're still collecting information about any returned funds that are coming from prior years, but would note this is a very sizable program. So even if we had a return of about 400 million, between the first 2 years of the program, I believe we provided somewhere north of $5.7 billion. So it's a relatively small percentage on a large allocation of funds. But we do see some folks who are struggling to implement and understanding that. That's part of the reason why what you see in the governor's budget is an additional allocation of 400, I think it's about 435-ish million to bring the tier 2 rate down to all LEAs that have 55% unduplicated pupils or more, to provide some additional funding and stability in funding for those folks. We're also looking at the funds that are being returned as being used to bump up the tier 1 rate, because that's been an issue for folks too. So I think from the state perspective, in terms of funding, we're really doing what we can to shore up the rate structure there and to try to make things more consistent for folks. We also have been working with the Department of Education and the work that they've been doing across the state with their technical assistance network. And to the extent that folks are having trouble pulling together a quality program, would certainly recommend reaching out to the folks in the Expanded Learning Division at the Department of Education. They can get you connected up with our statewide technical assistance network for after-school programs. So there's quite a bit happening at the state level to try to support folks in putting out those quality programs and being able to sustain them over a period of time.
Based on several reports that I've read, one recently, I think it was March 2022-23, from the Public Policy Institute of California, that according to their research that they've done, the price tag is somewhere around $100 billion needed over the next decade to maintain school facilities. And Jessica, you mentioned Proposition 2 that was just passed by the voters. Of that $10 billion, $8.5 billion was earmarked for K through 14 schools. $8.5 billion out of $100 billion price tag, projected price tag by the PPIC. Any other conversations or thoughts about funding school facilities in another format in addition to state bonds or local bonds? Has that ever been part of the conversation? I'm not sure if it's a good conversation to have or not. I'm just trying to think of different creative ways to add more money, make more money available for school facility needs.
I think it's a difficult problem because certainly there's a lot of need, but there's also limitations in terms of what we can do in state funding. I'm sure people know this, but our state bonds, I know sometimes the voters think of them as like free money, but we do pay debt service on state bonds on the general fund side. So that's additional funds that we're paying out for facilities on the other side of the budget for schools. And so that we're quite limited, I think, beyond sort of our current structure in terms of what the state can support. I think for us, we're really focused. I know there's a lot of concern about, are we returning to categoricals? But I think if you notice, a lot of our categoricals recently have really only been with one-time funds. And most of our ongoing funds go out in a general purpose way, and we're really focused on that. And not only our ongoing funds, but you may notice that there's $1.8 billion in discretionary block grant for TK-12 schools in the governor's budget. And that's really in recognition that there are increasing costs across the board for a variety of things, and that could include facilities and maintenance. But recognizing that the more that we provide those general purpose dollars to LEAs, they can prioritize them and use them for whatever their needs are. And that could include things like facilities and deferred maintenance, and just trying to make sure that we are pumping as much as we can of those precious resources into our schools so that they can use them for their highest priority needs.
With the discretionary block grant tied to the state priorities, can you help me settle my case that those funds are intended to be fully discretionary? Am I accurate in saying that?
100%. Okay. Yes. And I knew exactly what you were going to ask before you put the question, because we've gotten several questions here. I think our intent and indeed what we think the language says is that it's discretionary, although because of the questions we received, we're working right now to try to make sure that the language is even clearer around the discretionary component of that. The state priorities that are listed are really suggestions, but in essence, those funds can be used for any local priority purpose.
So I'm going to take this opportunity to put my plug in for some recommended language where it says including the state priorities, including but not limited to. Maybe that clears things. I don't know.
We will take that. We will take that into consideration. Definitely.
I was going to say this will be a perfect example of how the feedback that we receive influences the changes that you see to the language.
Well, I can't thank you all enough. I really can't, sincerely, for the time that you've taken out of your busy schedules to be with us today. Really, really appreciate it. One final question I have is, what can we do here at the local level in Kern County to assist the Department of Finance in budget development, budget implementation? How can we be a better partner for you guys at the state level?
Carlos, you're always a great partner. So I think we appreciate the ability to have open conversations with you and to really get your insight in terms of how things are actually happening in practice in the field, because I think that's one thing we don't always have the opportunity to get out into the field as much as we would like. And oftentimes, we recognize we put out policies and, functionally, sometimes they end up getting implemented a little bit differently than we would have anticipated. So providing that type of feedback, I know you had mentioned to, participating in the public processes as proposals are going before the budget. It's always very helpful, particularly if there are proposals that the administration's put out that you're supportive of and you want to see continuing through the process, to have folks come up and show up in those hearings and voice that support. I know, the Career Ed Master Plan is one area that I think we've been really appreciative of Kern County's input and insight around, and as we're having those conversations through the budget process, I think, bringing examples of some of the great work that's happening in Kern will be really helpful and informative in those conversations, because I think you guys have done a great job in terms of collaborating and making those pathways in many of the areas of emphasis that we're hoping can be lifted up. So really just, being available and having the communication and being approachable is, I think, the biggest benefit to us in the process.
Yeah, Carlos, all I can say is it's hard to imagine you all being better better partners, because your advocacy is so great, and we really appreciate all the outreach and the opportunity to come and speak in forums like this to provide information for folks who might be interested in your area. So thanks for all that you do, and for the folks in your constituency area that are listening, just know that the folks at Kern County Office of Ed are doing a great job in making sure that the needs of their communities are known at the state level.
Greatly appreciated, ladies. Appreciate it so much. And you guys always have an open invitation to come visit us in Kern County anytime.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for listening to the Classroom and the Capitol podcast. Join us again next time as we continue to explore the connection between decisions made at the California State Capitol and classrooms in Kern County and beyond. Production facilities for this podcast are provided by KETN, a service of the Kern County Superintendent of Schools Office.